Right, well, good evening, everybody, and it's very good indeed to see you in person in our lecture theatre in Birdcage Walk. And welcome to the 2023 Defence Professional Engineering Institutions Lecture. A bit of a mouthful, so I'll just let everyone sit down. And it's very good indeed to see people in person. I've spent quite a lot of the last couple of years addressing audiences of 2 or 3, but with the camera sort of peering at you, and you're never quite sure, whether anyone's listening or which way you should be looking, and so on. So my name's Peter Flynn. I was the 136th president of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I need to just start with a few sort of housekeeping points. First of all, could you please switch your phones off if you haven't done so already? Fortunately, I've remembered to do that. And secondly, I'm assured that there are no fire alarms planned this evening. So if the thing does go off, please go out of the fire exits and go out of the front door of the building, turn left and walk towards cockpit steps. So in the direction, if you like, of Buckingham Palace, about 100 yards. And we'll take it from there. So there we are. So it's our privilege as the Institution of Mechanical Engineers to host this lecture or series of lectures on behalf of the wider professional engineering community. And defence is a big part of engineering in the UK. I was told today that something like a third of new registrants with our institution, and we annually for the last 10 years or more have had the biggest number of new registrants each year, but about a third of our registrants are from the defence industry. And in fact, the Giles Harthill, who was inaugurated as president 10 days ago, he is chief technologist at the Atomic Weapons Establishment. So we have a very strong presence there. I've done my bit in that I started off in military aircraft, and subsequently, when I was working in the commercial vehicle industry, I was involved in a probably a fairly low tech but important vehicle program that was one of the most interesting I ever took part in. As far as our institution is concerned, we are 176 years old. We started in 1847. So I had the privilege during my presidential year of celebrating those 175 years of our existence. And in fact, if you look at our list of presidents, you'll see names like Stevenson and Whitworth, Armstrong, Napier, and so on. So that's very interesting. Even more interesting is the list of honorary fellows, which you won't be able to read from here, but it includes names like Gustav Eiffel, Lord Kelvin, Marconi, Wright, I'm not quite sure one of the Wright brothers anyway, Henry Ford, Whittle, and actually now King Charles III is an honorary fellow of our institution. So we have quite a lot of history. And our purpose as an institution is the thing we're aiming for. Our mission is to improve the world through engineering. And we do that in 2 ways. First of all, we aim to inspire and develop engineers from an early age as we register them as chartered engineers and as they develop through their careers. And secondly, we aim to achieve impact with, for example, government or education, society more generally, to make clear that engineering does genuinely have a big impact on society. And I've been taking a particular interest in the subject of net zero. And it's very clear, firstly, that the world faces a huge challenge in terms of addressing climate change and resolving matters. And secondly, and more importantly, it's all about engineering. So whether it's power generation, transmission, or the use of power and energy, it's a huge engineering project. And I'm personally... I'm rather envious of people going into engineering at the present moment because, if nothing else, they will not be bored. There's plenty to go at just in that one particular subject. So that's enough from me. I think this is very much a sort of self-help lecture or series of lectures. Can I introduce Rear Admiral Jeremy Bailey, who's going to lead things off. Jeremy joined the Royal Navy in 1992 as a Marine Engineering Officer. I see on the list here names like Type 23 frigates, Type 45 destroyers, Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers, so that's quite interesting. Commander of the Defence College of Technical Training, and since February of this year, the Submarine Delivery Agency as Director of Submarine Support. So that's a pretty interesting and important role. So thank you very much indeed, and Jeremy, over to you.
Peter, thank you very much indeed, and good evening, everybody. Wow, it feels fantastic, doesn't it, to be back together face-to-face for these sorts of lectures. So thank you on behalf of those of us who are speaking this evening to the IMechE for hosting this evening. It is really kind, both if you could extend my thanks to Giles as the new president, but Peter, thank you for opening and introducing the lecture this evening, and in particular to Jill and to Robin, who've helped us over the last couple of months really pull together the arrangements for this evening as well. So thank you very much indeed. The Defence Professional Engineering Institution lecture is becoming a real calendar entry, and I think it's a great opportunity for us in Defence to connect across the engineering community on what I would describe as contemporary topics. So last year, our Army colleagues focused on developing artificial intelligence to support robotic systems in the battle space, which was hosted by the British Computing Society. And the year before that, our colleagues from the RAF were exploiting data in the battle space, hosted by the IET. So you can see that actually there's a really broad range, and it's a great opportunity for us to engage a series, the series of professional institutes themselves. But this year it's the turn of the Royal Navy. And we've set out an approach and a title that says Agile and Adaptable, the Royal Navy in the 21st Century. In a speech last year at the Royal College of Defence Studies, Lord Robertson opened up with a really simple but challenging statement that change is never as quick as it is today and will never again in history be as slow as it is today. And it's that acceleration of change that we've really got to think about. We're doing that, of course, in an era of increasing competition with complex challenges and a new word for me, polycrises, which really interrelate and interconnect all of the challenges and opportunities that are out there for us. And of course, from a Royal Navy's perspective, we're trying to do that in a global context as well, operating across the oceans and representing the UK and protecting the UK interests wherever we go. So this all plays out in that interconnected world where issues of climate change and challenges of poverty, where issues of war really play out. And of course, that's the role of the armed forces, and the Royal Navy is proud to play its part in its contribution on behalf of the UK. So last decade, we saw the armed forces of the UK, of course, engaged in challenges of counterinsurgency. This decade, it's about confronting and deterring the return to state-on-state conflict, and of course characterised by this return to war in Europe. And the Ukraine conflict, I think, is showing exactly how accelerating technology, adapted in the hands of the warfighter, is being used to confront a conventional military force, and is done at the scale and pace necessary to compete in a war of survival. So I guess we need to be aware of these changes. The 21st century demands agility and adaptability, not only for our strategic outlook, but also in how our organisation shapes itself to respond to those contemporary challenges, and how our people across that enterprise develop the skills and the approaches necessary in order to operate within that environment. So this evening we've brought forward some excellent speakers. I'm grateful to colleagues who are going to take their turn at the lecture theatre in the lectern. So we're going to look initially at how we develop our future needs, how we understand and drive technology experimentation. We're then going to look at how we then place that into the acquisition pipeline and what that really means for the Navy that we're building today for the future. Focused then on what we're doing with our force elements and our Navy that we have today, and how we're focusing on ensuring that we're more available and more able to confront those challenges that are here. And last but by no means least, the importance of our people in delivering that overall. So hopefully, like me, you're looking forward to the series of presentations that we've got ahead of us today. And hopefully, like me, although I'll be sat on the panel, you can generate some useful questions that perhaps begin to connect some of the challenges that we face with some of the solutions that we're bringing forwards overall. And I think it gives me no further ado than to introduce Andy as our first and next speaker. Thank you.
Right, comms check. Can you all hear me? Is that good? What I should have done is worked out how do I turn the slides. Do I do it myself? Any ideas? These are the little things that you should probably sort out before, rather than having coffee. Look at that, I can do it myself. If I go the right way. Okay, right, so my name's Andy Mitchell. I'm Deputy Director, Navy Capability Sponsor, which will mean nothing to any of you, and it probably doesn't mean much to me. My background, 30 years in industry. I've just come from Babcock. I'm a systems mechanical engineer. I'm a chartered mechanical engineer. So it's good to be here. And the stuff I'm going to talk to you about, you'll all get. The challenge I've got is we're in the wider Navy and wider defence. They don't get some of this. And I want to talk for the next 85 minutes, but I'm not allowed to. I'm only allowed to talk for 5, so I'm going to go quickly through this. I'm going to introduce James McIntyre in a second, who's going to cover the other part of the 15 minutes I've got that I'm eating up already too much time into. Okay, right, so briefly, my job is to set the background. So everyone else talks about, I'm going to talk about the future in the background. As Navy Capability Sponsor, my job is to design the future Navy and then design the right future Navy, and there's a key there, right, and launch the right change projects, programs, to deliver that future Navy. So if you think of it as the best Lego set in the world, the Navy has got, it's an armed forces in itself, it's the best Lego set in the world. The challenge is not so much the right design, is how do you launch those right change projects. Well, I'll come to that. We put this slide up coming up to 2 years ago at DSCI, some of you will be familiar with that. I won't talk about state level competition, we know enough about that. JJ talked about change and the pace. Technology proliferation, ChatGPT hit 100 million users in 2 months. The next quickest was 9 months for TikTok. So if you look at the technology pace of change we've got, in our phone now, I've got more technology there than we've got in warships. We have to detrain our sailors. We've got a massive challenge there. This isn't meant to be a downward. I'm trying to sell a good, a positive future. I realise it's not necessarily coming across. I won't talk about affordability. We know about Brexit. We know about COVID. There's some massive challenges on affordability. Climate change, 29 centimetres, they're saying it will. The sea will rise. What does that do for us? We're talking about a metre rise in sea. That's a lot of, that's potentially Vietnam, Bangladesh, don't exist anymore. What's that going to do to the world in 40 or 50 years' time? What's the job of the Navy going to be? So just to say, it really is changing, and it's changing at a pace we've never seen before. Okay, how do we respond to that? How do we get over that? Typically, bottom left, you'll see it's sort of meant to represent Type 45. The way the Navy thinks, the Navy is, it's the number of ships we've got, isn't it? It's the number of frigates and destroyers. It's all about the platform. And then you put things on it, and that's what you've got. That's your capability. When I became capability sponsor, no definition of capability, no definition of sponsor, and no list of the things I sponsored, but it's everything. So we've tried to work and come up with a structure that says, right, this is how we're going to think about capability. So if you'll see sense, decide, effect. A capability is an effect or service. If you think about it as that, what am I trying to deliver? It's almost certainly going to have some sensors, some form of decider and an effector. If you take the bottom left, the sensor's the Samsung radar, the decider's the combat management system with the person there going, what's coming in, do I need to launch a missile? And the effector's the missile. But that works for boarding, that works for indirect fires, that works for resupply. The sort of logic. It's a model, it's not right, but it's sort of useful. We were thinking more bottom left. What we're trying to do is go up, in that example of anti-submarine warfare, should I have a frigate with a tail, a sonar that it tows behind it? And that's quite expensive. Or could I have 20 or 30 uncrewed seaboats of a certain size, all with cheap sensors? What would be better? What will give me the sense element of sense, decide, effect? My effect, should I launch a torpedo from a Merlin, or should I put it in a missile from a frigate? How do I think about those things? So the premise is we start to think more of a bottom down. And this is way too busy for you, so I apologise, but we're trying to get the point across. At the top there, level 0, is the why. Simon Sinek's why, how, what? The why, the mission. So the Royal Navy prides itself on being able to do everything. We can do thousands of different missions. We have to select the few missions that we design the Navy against. We are now designing the Navy and designing defence I would argue in the past, we have waited for something to go out of service, and then we have launched the next thing, which is sort of a slightly bigger and shinier version of what we had before. We are now actually trying to flip it around and actually design what we want from the Navy. So what's the mission at the top? What is the force, the level 1? How are you going to fight? The how? What's the doctrine we're going to use? Are we going to do something differently? Do we need to have social media influencing? Are we going to blockade something? Are we going to become insurgents ourselves? How are we going to do this job? That spawns level 2, which is what are the things you need to do? What's the effects or services you need to deliver? Level 3 are the building blocks, sensors, deciders, effectors, enablers. And right at the bottom, deliberately right at the bottom, is the host or the platform. We're trying to get, and we are succeeding in getting Navy and Defence to move away from it's all about the platforms to, I'm not saying they're not important, they are important, they're really complex things, but they're only there to host your sensors, deciders, effectors, which give you a capability, which helps you fight, which helps you complete the mission. This for me is the interesting one. Up until, so when I said we didn't design the Navy, we launched projects, that was sort of okay because we basically had 2G. So if you think about back to the phone when you could speak to people and you could send text messages. That's all we had, and to some extent that's what we've got today. As you're aware, you'll have seen in Ukraine, you'll see from your phone, that is not the current world. You cannot live that way anymore. We now need to have 5 or 6G, we need to be passing data around. In the past, it was okay to have comms and a bit of chat, a bit of text, because everyone was trained together. The person on one ship could talk to the person on the other ship or on land, and it sort of worked. That won't work anymore. The data, the speed of decision making is moving too fast. So you're moving from command and control to some form of nodes on a network. If I talk about the Navy and people talk about how many ships have we got, for me, it's how many nodes in a network have I got. So if I count the ships, if I count the vehicles, if I count the helicopters and planes, if I count the boats, if you start adding the Royal Marines in, if I add the drones in, if we add some of our sailors, I get to 10,000 nodes on a network. And we can have a long debate whether it's 10,000 or 5,000 or 12,000, but it's certainly not 30. If you're 10,000 nodes on a network, 5,000 of which will be deployed at any one time in the world, some of those nodes will be on the network, some of them will be off. Some will be deliberately on and deliberately off. We'll be wanted to download apps. All of them is going to have compute power. We'll want to download apps to them. We'll need to keep that updated. That's a completely different way of thinking it than currently we send a ship off. If we want to upload software on it, we wait till it comes back into port and walk on, literally walk on with a drive. So we're talking about a completely different way of thinking. And finally, for me, I don't know, I've talked too much, sorry. So this is more for a reassurance of you. You'll all get this, others are slightly more dumbfounded by it, but we try not to think about technology readiness levels. We are thinking about capability readiness levels. And technology readiness levels, and the reason it's red there, the E bit, and some of you all know defence lines of development, tepid oil, so training, equipment, personnel, etc. Actually, there's more on the plus side. I've got to add another one, which is enterprise capacity and capability. The readiness level of capability you're putting into service is the lowest of all of those elements. And almost certainly the E, the technology, will be at the highest. It'll be the other bits that trip us up. And one of the reasons with the Valley of Death occurs, we don't deploy stuff into service, and you look at us and go, how can you not have a drone flying from a ship? Why have you not got that? It's not the technology. It's the fact that legislation hasn't caught up with us, or that we don't have a branch structure in place to do it, or we don't know how to train. So we think about capability readiness levels in terms of how we deploy. And that's me. Hopefully that wasn't too long. I know Steve certainly wants more time, so I'm going to introduce you now to James from DSTL, who'll give you a bit more of a, how do we then deploy innovation?
Sorry, can I just stop you for a second before you start? I'm doing the video. I don't normally do this, but if you move slightly away from the podium, we can't hear it on the recording. So, I don't want to cramp anyone's style, and sorry for the interruption, but if you can stay sort of there, that would be
not a problem.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
So Andy's right. We need to change the way we think and approach and deliver new capabilities. And capabilities normal. So what capabilities do we want to deliver? When Andy's slide on ASW, that's one view of how we could deliver ASW. There may be other ways. So how do we decide what are the right capabilities? Everyone's got lots of good ideas. I look out there, you've all probably had a really good idea in the past, but how do we take that idea, in my world I'm thinking of concepts, how do we take that concept and actually turn it into something that's meaningful? Engineering systems engineering, good engineering practice. We've got to be able to identify and develop new concepts. Linking back to Andy's talking about capability readiness levels, how do we understand concepts and how are they mature enough? What do we need to, in terms of all those different levels, where do we need to put investment to actually bring up confidence in the system? How do we know that those ideas are useful? And I say useful, is it going to do what the warfighter needs? Are they possible? Are they technically possible? Is there are the engineering technically possible? Deliverable, going back to defence lines of development, is there a blocker in the system that will prevent us getting that? So we need to think about the whole, it's the capability we need to think about. So it looks better up there than on the screen here, but we're introducing an approach within the Royal Navy to dovetail into what Andy was talking about, based on basic systems V diagram and developing an approach, a process to take those good ideas and turn them from concepts into capability. But part of that, what we're doing is building up evidence to show in justification for balance of investment, because there's lots of things out there we could do, but we need to go after the right things. So we need to build up that evidence. And when we talk about innovation, one of the key things for me in innovation is experimentation. We can all sit there in our rooms, think about something. I want to get things wet. But there's a role, collectively we're investing a lot of time and effort into synthetic testing. Synthetic environments, they're really good to rapidly prototype new concepts, new ideas, get something in front of a user, pretty quickly turn around, is this good? Answer that, is it useful question? But hey, I like doing trials, and trials can be anything from being in a lab, in the field, on the water. But one of the key things the Navy have been doing for the past, I'm going to go back to Unmanned Warrior in 2016, is operational experimentation, getting new, and I do say it could be technology or systems, into the hands of the user and testing it and trialing it in a real operational environment. Now, I'm not going to dwell too long on this slide. You're quite busy. But when we talk about concepts, it could be anything from a new technology, from how do we get an uncrewed surface vessel on and off a larger platform, up to system of systems, that capability, that sense, decide, effect approach that Andy was talking about. How do we protect? And I'm looking at you, Jay, because I remember briefing you on this years ago. How do we protect high value assets in harbour? How can we bring systems together to do that sense, decide, effect? So the key message here is, concept. What it could be is we're looking at all different levels. So Andy mentioned we need to do things faster. So how are we doing things faster? Well, the Royal Navy have set up back in 2019 a team, NavyX, this innovation team, and the mandate of NavyX is to rapidly prototype and test new concepts. We can't afford to go back to the old school way of doing procurement. We need to be doing things differently, and this is part of the core DNA of NavyX. So how do NavyX operate? Well, it's a bit like when I was talking about concepting and that sort of concept capability. That's a pipeline. It's be able to identify the right ideas and then take those ideas, prioritize them, and experiment with a willingness to accept failure. Because sometimes failure is good. If you fail for the right reasons, it's good because you learn lessons. But the key thing I want to sort of highlight with this, with the concepting and the NavyX Ideas pipeline, is that ideas are great, but they're just ideas. How do we take ideas and turn them into something? Innovation, to me, is about taking ideas and putting them through a process. So last slide from me. Just as a use case, and I think it's a really good example of innovation and experimentation. NavyX, we've quickly identified the need to have our own trials platform. So I've been frustrated over the years trying to get something into service, and warship availability, platforms can be difficult. So one of the key aims of the XV Patrick Blackett is, and it's something we're using immediately on, is an experimental trials platform, something where we're currently hosting new technologies and testing them, and we've got an order book of lots of other areas where we'll be fitting maybe a little widget or something much bigger on there and testing. But also, coming back to capability readiness levels again, it's not all about the technology. Technology can be sometimes be the easiest thing. It's other parts of the system that we really need to get after. And a good example here is surface autonomy. We're growing our understanding of how we use large USVs, but the key thing is how do we do it safely? And it's potentially a major block going forward. If we can't show how we can use these things safely, how will we operate them? And IMechE is leading the way, working with the regulatory body of understanding how do we operate these things safely. So it's a good example of focusing on something which is part of the CRL sort of process and de-risking that, so that paving the way for others to come along and insert their technology. So how are we doing on time? We're on summary now. I don't intend to go through all this. The bullet points are there. But certainly the key message I want to sort of take away is that, we're innovating all the time, but innovation is more than just an idea. It's thinking about from that. I really, chatting with Andy about the high level mission, we've got to think about that technology, that system, that engineering process to take, an idea and link it all the way back up to what the need is. So I think we'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Commodore Steve Roberts. I'm a Navy engineer. I'm a member of the Institute of Engineering Technology. And my role here in this little section, together with my colleague Sally, we're going to take the themes that Andy has just described from those concepts, say, well, what are we actually doing about them? How are we actually buying them? And then Sally's going to go into how we actually are supporting them. That difficult bit of actually getting the ships and capabilities that Andy's just talked about to actually be fully sustainable and supportable. So I'm going to introduce, I'm going to do this through 3 of our projects and programs. So at the moment, I'm the senior responsible owner for the Type 26 frigate program and the Type 31 frigate program. Now, for those of you who've worked in government, you may be familiar with that term. It means that actually I'm accountable for those programs. So whilst I'm standing here in uniform, I'm really here as a program manager, as a project manager. And we'll get into that in some of those areas. So what I'm going to do for my section, I'm just going to introduce 3 capabilities that we're delivering, which hopefully ties into what Andy has just described, and hand over to Sally to explain how we're actually going to support them. First one is one of the traditional platforms that Andy mentioned. This is HMS Glasgow. She's a Type 26 frigate. We have 8 Type 26 frigates in build and on contract with BAE Systems in Glasgow and their yards in Govan and Scottstown. Cut steel on 4 of them with the rest of the 8 on contract. Now the key things that I just want to bring out about this was a very traditional procurement. Taking the themes that Andy's just described, converting them into user requirements, breaking that down into system requirements, working with our partners in BAE Systems, and then coming up with a contract and then delivering against that contract. So it looks like a very, very familiar program, a very familiar platform. But what's different about Glasgow is that if you look closely at the back, she's actually got 2 hangars. She's got one for a helicopter, and she's got another mission bay where we can store all the drones and all the clever ideas that Andy's team can think of. So it's the first step that we are taking to start delivering the network that Andy just talked about, with a frigate being one node in that network and controlling either remotely or autonomously a number of other network drones in there. So that's the 26. The 2 other pictures there, just to remind, top right, that's Portsdown Technology Park. That is effectively our software testing area. And that ties into Andy's other theme, is that we have to get much better at understanding how to develop software faster than get it to the ships. And I haven't forgotten that actually there's still some, what some might say, proper engineering, my marine engineering colleagues might talk to me about. That's the gearbox going into HMS Glasgow. So we've got to combine all the traditional technologies and the traditional approaches with the new approaches. So that's the Type 26, quite a traditional procurement, and a relatively traditional support solution. She will be designed to hunt submarines, and she'll be on duty in the North Atlantic, protecting our continuous at-sea nuclear deterrent, and actually on duty protecting our maritime task group, the carrier strike group in the Indo-Pacific. And you may have heard about the Navy's desire to do the Indo-Pacific tilt. And just to add a bit of interest, we've managed to export the design to Canada and Australia. So Canada tend to build 15 of their Canadian surface combatants, and Australia intend to build 9. And that creates an interesting enterprise when it comes to availability, because it gives us a different access to the supply chain and a different way we need to deal with the supply chain, not just in build, but also when we're looking at supportability. Now, the next program I want to talk about is where we've actually procured a capability in a very different way. You heard me talk about Type 26, and it very much start with the user requirements and flow down the V curve and then back up again. Type 31 is very much a cost-constrained program. Key thing about any defence activity is that cost is always part of the factor. And we started off as the Navy, recognising that whilst we might need high-end platforms such as the Type 26 anti-submarine warfare, we still need the equivalent of boots on the ground for maritime security. This is where the Type 31 comes in. It's where we started off with, this is the amount of money that we've got. What can we buy for this platform? And then we went to a competition. And we've ended up with a design. It's in service at the moment with the Danish Navy. That's where the design came from. And we've taken that design, and Babcock won the competition. And we now have 5 ships on contract, with 2 having inbuilt cutting steel on the east coast of Scotland, building the Type 31s, which are designed for a maritime security platform. And I think Sally's going to talk much more about this, because there's no point buying this capability if you can't support it. And so we have to be both agile in acquisition and agile in support. Now you may be thinking, well, that's all very traditional so far. And Sally will talk about that, so we'll come back to that one. But let's go back to Andy's point about we're going to need to do things differently. This is our mine hunting capability. This is a program that's actually in the Gulf at the moment, and this is changing the way we're doing business. Rather than designing ships with people in them to go into the minefield, why not use autonomy? Why not use these particular remote vessels to actually do that for you? And we're transitioning, as part of Andy's concept work, through from ships through to platforms. Now, these will need motherships, and these don't actually take away people at this stage. These aren't autonomous, these are remote. But it shows that the steps that we are taking to start developing that network and delivering mine hunting capability in a different way. So hopefully I've just introduced some themes there, in which I'll now hand back over to Sally, and I think your slide is that one there.
So 31 aims to have a minimum 80% availability over a 15-year life at R2, which means that effectively every year they're allowed to be out of service for 10 weeks, which is comparative to a 45, which has a current 56% availability. So it's a massive step change in availability that we're aiming for. And we're going to look to do that by commercially supporting, using commercial ideas to support these platforms. Effectively, a 31 for a flow to move has very little difference to running a tanker. They have engines, they have to heat, they have to feed people. The basic flow to move concept shouldn't be massively different to anyone else that's running around the world. And why do they get 90% availability and we can run it 50? So we're competing that support solution at the moment to get some commercial ideas into the way we do supported shipping. That 80% availability is likely to be delivered also at reach. It's unlikely that 4 of these ships will come back to the UK particularly frequently. They'll be anywhere around the world, and it may be Singapore one year and Antigua the next. We're not forward basing them in any particular home. We're going to move them around for their 15 years of their life, which gives us some real support challenges, because whoever supports these platforms has to be agile and available, especially when the Navy, as they want to do, wants to change where they're going to be. One year they might be in Singapore, and then at 2 weeks' notice they'll be in Japan. We have to be able to to use that. The key is to be able to get this availability is going to be putting the maintainer at the heart of the solution. This shouldn't be new, but we haven't been doing it as well as we should be. We have a crew of very capable people, and we're going to use them to their maximum availability. The key thing for that is to be providing them tools, equipment and time within their schedules. There are some amazing tools out there. We're working with MTU for some augmented reality tablets. You hold your tablet up to your MTU engine and it will flash on the screen where the sensor's gone. And then the maintainer can just change that sensor or change that pump. It puts a lot of key diagnostic tools in the hands of the people actually doing the job. Because these platforms are also very lightly crewed. They're aimed to sail with 107 people, which is a very light crew. So we have to equip these people to do the best possible job with the minimum amount of downtime in that. Also to aid that, the telemetry coming back, security notwithstanding, will feed back into the class cell that will be Portsmouth based. So the data coming back will allow better maintenance scheduling, better diagnostic tools, and it'll allow those spares to be on the dock when those ships hit where they happen to be. In the past, we've used a purple gate system, which is great when you're in times of war, but actually not ideal when you're just, working out of Antigua. So we're going to use a commercially available supply chain. So if you can buy an MTU spare in Singapore, we'll allow those ships or support partners to buy them in Singapore. Environmentally, it's also the best option. We're driving to net zero, which on a warship is a big ask. If we can cut down those carbon miles and speed up our supply chain, why would we not do that? So Purple Gate will be there if we need to, but that's not our first option. This bimodal supply chain will get spares and equipment to the platform in the most appropriate way. Cool. The other thing that will be different is we're going for a fixed duration for FTSPs or the support periods. At the moment, you bring a 45 in for 10 weeks, 15 weeks later, it's still sat in Portsmouth. We're not going to be able to do that. We're going to be in a commercial dockyard, and every day will cost the Navy a considerable amount of money. So we need to be better at planning, using that data, the telemetry coming back from the ships, the commercial support best practice will be how we will be achieving those 80% availability targets.
Good evening, everybody. We're going to do a little bit of a double act, so we'll swap over at various places. Please point out if we're standing in the wrong place and you can't hear us. I'm assuming that you can at the moment. I'm Scott Bauer. Forgive me, because I'm not an engineer, so I feel threatened in this environment. In fact, I'm a warfare officer, so therefore I'm the guy that stood at the front of all of these, or at the top of all of these, saying, come on, this is the way that we need to go, and that's putting it very simply. I've spent 32 years driving, well, not being part of the submarine service, and in the end driving them and running the flotilla out of Devonport, so I have quite a lot of experience with it, and joined the Submarine Delivery Agency about 4 years ago, and moved into project resolution about 2 years ago, which is the in-service availability improvement programme by effect. Sarah.
Thank you. Commander Sarah Parker. I work in the DE&S, which is the ship's equivalent of the SDA, and I work in Renown, which is the ship's availability improvement programme. And I'm actually not going to tell you what I do, because I'm not going to steal my own sandwiches for the next part of my presentation, so you're going to have to wait to find out. And I can see you getting excited already. I'm actually going to try and persuade you that we've got the hardest job, because everybody else you've heard from already gets to think about this wonderful future and get to explore all of the technologies that we know are being invented today and we're going to be using in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time, and in years to come. We've got the really, really tough job of trying to adapt the platforms and the technologies that were developed sometimes decades ago, and also the platforms that we brought into service only relatively recently in the form of the Queen Elizabeth class carriers, but actually that are going to be therefore around for decades to come. So we've been given a direct challenge from the Secretary of State that says, and you heard Sally quote a Type 45 availability statistic at the moment, which is achieving less than 60% availability. we've been given the target directly from the Secretary of State to improve our availability of the platforms that we have in service today through rapid and sustainable improvements. I've put up there a couple of statistics to say that we're achieving less than 70% availability in our warships and less than 50% in our submarines. And when you compare that to our commercial operators that are getting close to 100%, we've clearly got a challenge ahead of us. And I'm going to pass you back across to Scott, who's going to give you more detail around the two programmes before we come back to myself for a bit of a case study.
Okay, I think it's important to mention at this point that there is a target. You can see that at the very top of this list. We've compared kind of best practice with what Resolution and Renown do. And actually, whilst the two programmes were set up independently, with no sort of comparison at that particular point, we've come out with very similar ways of tackling this. Okay? And I think out of this, what I would say as well, is that the theme that I want to pass across, and it's been mentioned already quite a bit, is about how do we do these things through life and how do we use data better? Because that is what's going to give us our solution. From my perspective as well, I have to say that the challenge that I was given covers a large amount of these areas. My sphere of influence is within an in-service environment, looking at, and we've heard the lines of development mentioned already, looking largely at the equipment and logistics lines of development. And we all know that if you tackle just elements of a line of development or elements that feed into the system, you're not going to guarantee that platform availability. So it's how is it that I reach out? During this, I will be using largely project resolution examples, and therefore it's submarine related. And I will also say, whilst the 70% and 50% statistics look dreadful, if you were to look at it that way, actually the expectation of availability within the nuclear world is not naturally as high as it would be within the warship world. So there will always be a difference. So therefore, if I was to look at this, we have a very simple target. There is a target that's set. Defence set it, there's a task, they give it to Navy Command, they say, we require you to do these tasks, and that is translated into, we need to have available submarines to deliver at this level of readiness, and if I was to take a simple example, the continuous at sea deterrent, which by its very nature means it's there all of the time, then there we go, we've set our target. That is a good practice and good principle. How do we get to that target? Actually, we need to get to it, and I'm looking at it from an availability improvement perspective. I need to drive it, and I have to set those dependencies. Those dependencies come from the remaining lines of development to make sure that we've got the infrastructure, etc., to support that. That is being driven now through an SRO set up from an availability pipeline or availability improvement area within Navy Command, so that we can start to liaise directly with those other lines of development to make sure that we are inputting into a holistic improvement of availability within those submarines. But where do we get that information from? And we get that information and we're using it from Kraken. And I will occasionally refer to Kraken as Foundry, because in the submarine world, it's the same thing. It is the data tool set that we are using as an umbrella system to gather the information, to get the right information so that we can have an influence in the in-service world. Because in the in-service world, it is where the non-availability materialises. So we only ever see it in very simple terms on the Clyde, because that's where the platform becomes unavailable because it's not available to go to sea. Okay, and I think that's quite an important distinction, because it means we are, as Sarah has already said, we are trying to tackle the problem in the here and now. Right, we need to do that, and we have set up within the SDA, the programming team. They sit within the in-service team, and they are the ones that will set the plan and try and understand exactly what is needed for that platform as it goes through all of its maintenance periods, so that we can set that in advance. Okay, that's the ambition. Well, how do I, within project resolution, try and influence that? I influence that, and I will come back to what I call 4 pillars at the very end. I influence that through the maintenance optimization pillar of project resolution, which kind of gives me targets to say, I need to reduce the amount of maintenance. And therefore, in order to do that, we need to properly analyse what maintenance is being undertaken to make sure that it is safe to remove from that programme. And we have, across the enterprise, brought in the joint programming engineering team who look at maintenance and try and remove those elements where we can in order to reduce the demand signal. That gives us a bit more time, and time really is the currency at the moment. As we move down the list here, what we need to do is make sure that we've got a stores strategy that supports that maintenance programme. It is no good having a really good plan if the stores aren't delivered on time. We have struggled in the past with some elements of providing those stores with long lead times. So how do you rectify that problem? That's being done in two areas at the moment. The submarine delivery enterprise is looking at processes, because it is saying when we gather stores from different areas, what we're doing is saying we need different criteria and different authorization and different certification depending on where it's come. So let's standardize that and make sure that we can do it from a very simple perspective. We are liaising through this with our primary partners. We work primarily with Rolls-Royce, Babcock Marine and BAE, which is probably no surprise. There are long contracts with those, and what we do need to do is make sure that they're improving that situation. And we've done that through the submarine delivery enterprise by bringing them into a work strand in there called the supply chain work strand, which means that they formulate part of that improvement that I was talking about with regards to how we go through the stores process and make sure that we're all certified in a standard manner. Through life support, I think this is absolutely key. Whilst I'm in an in-service environment, I would look at replacing something in a very, as a very sticking plaster kind of approach. Okay? It is no good there being a problem with a piece of equipment and all we ever do is replace that equipment without finding what the root cause is. So how do we do that? We need to go back to our data, find out what the root cause is, and actually tackle those root causes rather than continually replace the pump or replace the piece of equipment. We've got that in process now, but that in itself won't solve the problem. So the next step from that is to how do we get that information back into the acquisition world so that we can say, here, we recognise that this particular piece of equipment doesn't work well. Therefore, can we look at something else? Can we look at a different way of doing it? Or, if it absolutely needs to be that piece of kit, then let's put it somewhere where we know we can get to it so that we can actually maintain it at the level that it needs maintaining. And that is being built up with our transition into service team, and we're working with the Dreadnought Alliance to try and achieve that in a much better way. That is probably a little bit late to the table, so we're transferring that information and transferring that idea into the future SSNR, or future submarine. Finally, I think on there, I may have missed one, do forgive me if I have, I'll point it out. Finally, it's about how do we change those behaviours? Actually, that's really the hardest thing. How do you, as a big organisation, do you change the behaviours that support what you need to do? And we've really, I think the biggest advance that we've had in there are twofold. One is looking out to defence strategic support to see how they can help us to deliver things. And secondly, looking back to the enterprise approach within the submarine delivery enterprise, which has all our industrial partners, our two customers of the DNO, Defence Nuclear Organisation, and Navy Command in there, with the SDA involved in there, trying to coalesce and get agreement on how we look at these things going forward. So, what have I described? I've very briefly gone down the list. I tackled this from a resolution perspective, reminding you that it's in service, by looking at waterfront development, maintenance optimization, and equipment availability. And I call that my agile approach, in the sense that what I try and do is develop activities that will try and alter and improve, so continuously improve those areas on behalf of the core programme. On the other side, I try and look at it from the fourth pillar, which is about enabling. And enabling for me is about how we look at better data sharing, and that we're doing with our enterprise partners as well. Indeed, in one area we're trying to set up with Babcock Marine to make sure that we get an operational look at how we tackle problems that are happening in the here and now, and also that asset management approach that gives us that proper, true, through-life approach. Now, anyone that's an asset management expert will know that you can't describe asset management from just an engineering and logistics perspective. You need to bring other elements into it as well. So there is growth required in that area. I think there's quite a quick run through there, but an awful lot behind what Resolution is trying to achieve from a fairly sort of restricted position, but with a big ambition, and that ambition is growing. So.
Do a quick swap. So Scott has taken you through our joint approach to increasing platform availability, and from that very good segue, you probably expect me to talk about through-life asset management, which I am going to do, but I am going to do it through a slightly different lens, and I'm going to do it through a supply chain approach. As you've heard in the majority of our presentations already, supply chain is something which causes us a real challenge. How do we balance the defence requirement to maintain a warehousing strategy so that we can support our platforms overseas and at home during a time of crisis, versus our need to be agile and be able to ensure that our inventory is in the right place at the right time to be able to meet those needs? So the way that we have to try to do that is by using our inventory as a strategic asset. And this is something that we've been trying to do for a number of years. But what we're going through at the moment, and what you're starting to hear about our approach at the moment that's different, is our approach to our data management and the way that we can actually look at asset management in a fundamentally different way. And there are a couple of key changes that we've experienced in more broadly across the industry, but we are now starting to adopt across defence. So I'm a naval logistician. I said I wasn't going to steal my own sandwiches. I am a logistician. I'm one of a few non-engineers in the room, but actually I'm quite proud to be in this room because everything that I do at the moment and that I've done over the last 16 years of my career is absolutely in tandem with our engineering community, because the two have to work together. The new approach that, as I say, that we've been spearheading through Renown and through Resolution has really given us the opportunity to spearhead something quite different. And as I say, that is really predicated on our ability to use our data in a different way. And I'm going to move ahead one slide. Again, probably quite a busy slide. You've seen a few of these. We in Defence love to put as much information on one slide as possible. And if my seniors close their ears, it's usually because they tell me that they only want to see one slide. So this is a slide that tries to tell you everything on a page. But effectively, our vision, as shown here, is to maximise ship availability through an effective and an efficient supply chain. But it's really got to be supported by clean data, accurate demand, and a coherent organisation. Three things that at the moment in Defence we really don't have. And this is where we are really endeavouring to try to get to. And this is probably not representative of just Defence. I would suspect that this is probably quite similar. And when I've given this brief to our American colleagues, to our Canadian colleagues, they really, really share this picture. As I say, none of these are particularly rocket science, but they do set the foundations for us to ensure that we've got the right parts in the right location at the right time. So this gives a relatively simple assessment of how we've been operating over the last decade, and with particular reference to the top, and I've been told there is a pointer that I'm going to try and use here. There we go. So right up on the left-hand side there, these describe some of the challenges that we're facing today. Poor quality data. This leads to an inability for us to be able to generate our demand forecast, which means me as the logistician doesn't know what I need to go and buy in order to support our maintainers. And this is also set in the context of a rather disaggregated organisational structure. No single team in the D&S, or indeed across in Navy Command, has actually got responsibility for delivering our spares availability. We have pockets of really, really good people who are all trying to deliver their own part of the picture, but no one's got that red dot on their forehead that says you have responsibility for delivering spares availability for that particular class of ship. So we've changed that, and we've developed a team and a new organisational construct which really does put that red dot on someone's forehead and say, you have responsibility for delivering platform availability, and there's a sub-team working to that individual who now has responsibility for delivering our spares availability. And that's been a real step change in the way that we do our business, and a step change in Navy Command's ability to point across to the enabling organisation and say, you need to be delivering me my platform availability and my spares availability. So whilst many people will focus their attention, and we've already heard from Sally about some of the approaches we're trying to take to supply chain, how we can do things differently, a lot of approach tends to be on the commercial contracts that we have in place. And I'm sure many of you have heard through the National Audit Office, and there's been lots of focus on how we need to set, in the MOD and broader government, how we need to set our contracts with industry differently. But I'm not going to talk about that, because I think that's relatively well understood. What we've been really focusing our attention on in Renown and in Resolution is getting our supportability data right, which means that I then have a better chance of predicting what I need to buy to deliver the maintainers the spares they need to do their job. By addressing, we'll go back a slide. So by addressing our ILS elements, particularly configuration control at platform level, we're able to really, really predict what spares we think you're going to need. And what data am I talking about? Well, it's a relatively simple equation which any ERP tool, any enterprise resourcing planning tool out there would use. And that's an equation of the number of times I expect to do a task by the parts required to do the task. So this should be really, really simple. But actually those two key pieces of information have not been sufficiently maintained throughout the life of our platforms. And that's because we've got platforms which have been in operation for as I've said already, for a large number of years. So maintaining that data on what was built as a paper ship, and now moving that across and saying we want to digitally manage these platforms and the information associated with these platforms has been really, really challenging. We've now stepped into a world where we have got the ability to draw all of these information types together. And you've heard from Scott already, we've started to use a middleware, a data integration platform. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use the client, the industry partner that we're using, but we use Palantir Foundry. And for the first time, we've been able to draw together all of the information from our logistics information systems, from our engineering reliability maintainability studies. We're starting to be able to draw information from our sensors on board ship and bring that back with an intent for that to be real time, for us to be really able to understand the material state in real time of our platforms at sea. That means that I'm suddenly, for the first time, able to draw those pieces of the puzzle together, to be able to say, I genuinely expect to do that piece of maintenance this number of times this year, and I've got the right information in my maintenance management system that tells me this is the sparing required to do the job, and suddenly I can actually buy the right equipment. So this has really been the focus of the Renown supply chain workstream, which is the workstream I've been running for the last 2 years. And I'm generally really excited about where we're moving, and with the vision that we're actually going to have clean data and accurate demand forecast against which I can buy, alongside that new coherent organisation that genuinely puts a red dot on somebody's forehead to deliver spares availability. And the other part of that is that we are breaking down those traditional silos of engineering and logistics, and we are genuinely starting to bring together supportability engineering inside of the D&S in order to significantly increase the availability of our platforms. Move across.
Good evening. I'm Commander Kirsty Muller. I'm an aircraft engineer and I've been in the Navy about 18 years so far. My section of the presentation this evening is people-focused. I'm going to share with you our Naval Engineers Strategy 2023, which we've just published. I'm going to talk about its development and what we're trying to achieve through that strategy, and then how we can take it forward. So this is a strategy that has been developed by engineers for engineers. I think we can all agree that the success and strength of any organisation is directly linked by having a motivated, skilled and committed workforce. And this is only possible when we set the conditions whereby our people can feel valued, empowered and supportive. In the armed forces, we expect our people to deliver in often challenging and remote environments. And we have a responsibility of leaders of that armed force to ensure that we put in place a culture and a wrapper that enables our people to be the best that they can be. We enable our engineers by giving them the skills to solve problems through a modern and fit-for-purpose training system. We need to give them the tools so that they can solve the problems and rectify faults and defects. And we need to empower them by making sure we've got in place the appropriate regulation and policy. But success is not driven just by having a good organisational structure. We need that individual engineer on that surface ship, submarine or aircraft to buy into this whole strategy and to ensure that they engage with it and feed back to that organisation and deliver against our requirements. And this is why our strategy that we've just published is a two-way framework, a two-way agreement. It describes the responsibilities that the organisation has to its individual engineers, but it also describes the responsibilities of that individual to the organisation. Because only together can we actually achieve the objectives that defence sets us. So this activity started in late 2021 when we stood up the engineering profession, and Admiral Hyam, our Chief Naval Engineer Officer, was appointed by the First Sea Lord as the Head of Profession for Royal Navy Engineering. And this role comes with it accountability and responsibility. Accountability for the structural sustainability of the workforce, but also to make sure that we have the right sort of esprit de corps and culture. Once we put in place our governance structure through the Naval Engineering Board, we turned to think about how we could set the direction of travel for our profession as we go forward. We wanted to refresh and reset our focus, and it was clear with new capabilities coming into service and the ever faster development of technologies that we needed to refresh and rethink how we actually delivered our strategies. But what was really important with all of this is that our workforce is centre to success. And so we needed to make sure that our strategy was very people-centric rather than support-focused. And we developed this by engaging with our engineering community through the Seniors Conference, but also through standing up a working group, which has had representatives from all of our engineering specialisations in the Navy, so representatives from the Fleet Air Arm doing aviation, from the submarine community, and also from the surface ship community. And we've had feed in from people from the lower junior rates side right through to Admiral to make sure that we've got all of the different views, all the different experiences and ideas which will enable us to come up with a strategy that hopefully means something to everybody. So first up, the vision. Our vision is to have a skilled and innovative workforce delivering operational advantage in all environments by optimising availability, capability and sustainability. And our mission is to enable the engineer to be at the heart of our decision making. This is how we're going to achieve our vision. We talked about what it means to be an engineer in the Royal Navy, and through that discussion we've come up with 5 principles. So we believe all of our engineers, no matter which environment they work in, should be innovative, should be agile, should be skilled, professional, and there should be sustainability at the heart of what we do. And we've used these principles to develop our discussions, to talk about what's good, what's not so good right now, and how we can take this forward. And we've used them to sort of develop our strategic objectives. But before I talk about the strategic objectives and how we're going to do it, we wanted to talk about the outcome. There's absolutely no point in coming up with a strategy unless we know where we're trying to go. what we really want to see in 5 years' time is better availability. You know, we've talked about availability a lot this evening, but availability is absolutely key. And that is the benefit of this strategy for our organisation, is better availability on operations. But for that individual person, there also needs to be a benefit, so they will buy into the strategy as well. And for them, it's to improve the lived experience. You know, we want people to enjoy being at work. We want them to feel really part of the Royal Navy and really want to stay part of that team. But this will only work if we all buy into this sort of idea and we hold each other to account. And so the strategy really is a commitment from the seniors within the engineering community to support and enable our engineers to be the best that they can be every day. But the engineer, on the other hand, has to commit as well, and they need to engage and then challenge and deliver their best self in their work every single day. So when we started talking about our principles, we wanted to look at what we would expect the organisation and the engineer to actually deliver, to actually meet those principles. And we ended up with a list of headline aspirations, which you can see on the screen. You know, for an Agile principle, we felt the organisation should remove the barriers and empower our people. But we expect the engineer to be capable, confident and dynamic problem solvers. And really so much of this is about trying to sort of balance what we want the organisation to do for our people and what we want our people to do for the organisation. And once we'd really thought about what these headline aspirations were going to say, it then allowed us to sort of pull together our strategic objectives and our work streams, which we hope will help us give us that focus to deliver our overall strategy. So our first strategic objective is a professional and highly effective workforce trained and enabled to apply engineering leadership and technical expertise. This has got three main themes. The first one is around training and making sure we've got modern training that's fit for purpose and efficient. It's about making sure that we train people on the equipment they expect to use in a frontline scenario. It's about making sure that we test and adjust our training pipelines on a lot quicker and a lot more agile on our basis than we do at the moment. And it's making sure that our engineering training covers risk management and technical decision making, which is ultimately what we need our engineers to do at all levels. It's about promoting and supporting career development and making sure that people are aware of the opportunities that are available to them as a member of the armed forces. There's a huge amount of scope for them to do additional training and develop their careers in the direction they wish to do. And it's about professional accreditation. It's absolutely essential for us that our workforce are recognised as the professional engineers that they are. We need to make sure that the professional accreditation routes and pathways are absolutely embedded in our training pipelines, and then there's an expectation amongst our workforce that at certain career milestones you will reach certain professional accreditation levels. Our next one is a supported workforce that's empowered and equipped to solve engineering problems and make decisions. I think engineers really want to feel valued for the skills that they offer our community and our organisation. It's really important to them that they are valued for what they bring in terms of availability. It's about making sure that we have the right tools and we use them intelligently to influence our maintenance activity. There's so many opportunities through data exploitation, which we've talked about already this evening, that we can actually improve how we maintain our aircraft and ships and submarines. And we need to do that by reducing administrative burdens and also making sure that the right tools are there and the right support's there so that at the point they need to do an activity, they've actually got everything they need to do that. And that's both in terms of spares support and also technical publications and things like that. We need to make sure that our engineers feel confident and able to challenge any of the processes and procedures that we have in place that maybe aren't as fit for purpose as we'd like to be, or could be done better. But there's also a thread within this objective around skills, and we need to look at the skills our engineers need, not just now, but into the future. Technology is changing rapidly, and we need to make sure that however we train our people, we're able to upskill them at the rate that matches the technology that we're bringing into service. And the Pan Defence Skills Framework is key to unlocking this area. We want to have a supportive workforce that's positive, inclusive, diverse, and inspiring. This is about making people want to come to work. I think we get our best from our people when they feel really engaged with what they're doing every day, where they feel part of a team that's actually delivering something really important and very positive. When you talk to people in the Navy, and certainly when I've done a lot of exit interviews with people, you say, what really sticks with you? And it's a lot of the feedback you'll get is around the experience they've had with their team, with people who positively or sometimes negatively influence their career. But if we can make the workplace a really positive place to be, where they feel empowered and challenged and supported by their line managers and mentored and coached through career, then they'll want to stay. And we can do that by celebrating our engineers better. You know, we've got lots of reward and recognition opportunities within defence, and we've got our senior commendation. We've got a conference coming up in a few weeks' time, and we've had 33 citations received for that, which is a really positive thing to see, and also just shows how much our engineers do on a daily basis that shows that they deserve recognition. We need to have a sustainable workforce that's resilient and confident. There's two sides to this. Some of this is to do with sort of workforce and getting people in the door and having an attractive offer so that people want to join the Navy as an engineer and then want to stay in the Navy as an engineer. And we can do an awful lot through, you know, that overall package that we offer people. But the other side is looking after our people, making them resilient. That's looking after both their physical and mental well-being. You know, there's lots of fantastic opportunities in the forces around doing sport and adventurous training, and all of that helps their own personal resilience so that when we do send them away for long periods at sea, they can cope with that better. They can deal with the fact that they're a long way away from home for a long period, but also that when there's challenges, when there's defects, when there's activity they need to actually do, they can trust their skill set that they've got to actually resolve the problems that are in front of them. And then our final strategic objective is around having an ethical and curious workforce committed to continuous improvement. So innovation is something that we talk about a lot and we've heard about already today, and there's lots of great ideas out there. We've got lots of people who are hugely creative and innovating all the time, but what is really important is that we share those ideas so that when somebody on a Type 23 somewhere has a good idea, we share that amongst the Type 23 community, and the same within the Fleet Air and Submarine Service. There's an awful lot of innovating going on, and we just need to make sure we share that and we control it in a really positive way. We want to make sure that people can engage with some of the systems, you know, whether it's to do with training or policy. You know, there's always room for improvement, and it's making sure that our feedback mechanisms are as easy to use as possible. You know, often we'll visit people and we'll say, you know, what do you think of, you know, the job you're doing right now? And they'll say, oh, that training course I did, it wasn't great. You'll ask how they've actually fed that back, and often they won't have actually sent anything back to the training provider, so we don't know that we need to improve. So we need to make sure our feedback mechanisms are really easy to use, and we're doing lots of work by making that available through the My Navy application that the Naval Service has on phones and things like that. But it's also about being active listeners. You know, it's very difficult sometimes when you're the boss, when someone comes up with you that says something's not right, that there's a challenge in front of you. It's about accepting that challenge and then doing something about it. And we really want to have a culture where people can accept the criticism and then do something with it, rather than sort of stepping back and feeling quite defensive. And then finally, it's about improving our awareness of ethics and engineering. You know, supporting the broader sustainability agenda is so important for our futures, and we need to make sure our engineers feel part of that journey. So what's next? You know, it's all very well having a strategy. In some respects, writing a strategy is the easy bit. It's the implementation and the embedding of that strategy that's the difficult part. And that's kind of where we are now. We've got a conference on the 29th of June where we're going to focus on that strategy. We're going to put people together from across the engineering profession in the Navy to talk about it, to make sure they understand what cultures and behaviours we'd like to see, to discuss it and to come up with ideas to implement it. You know, we need people to walk away from that conference with small ideas that they personally can do, and maybe bigger ideas that maybe their organisation or the department can actually deliver. But beyond that, we need to keep monitoring. We need to make sure that we're actually delivering and making delivering the outcomes that this strategy is designed to deliver. We need to share our successes, but also our failures, and we need to champion the initiatives to take this forward. As engineers, we are by nature problem solvers, and I have no doubt that we have the capability to deliver this strategy, and that in 5 years' time we'll be able to look back and say, actually, you know, compared to where we were in 2023, we have much better aircraft and ship and submarine availability, and that our people are happier in what they do and they have a much better lived experience. Thank you.
Kirsty, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to all the speakers. So I guess for me it's really easy because I've just got to close out, and then I'm going to hand over to Peter and invite some people to come up onto the stage for a Q&A. And I just had three really simple things I was going to sort of pick out from the broad range of the approaches and the different elements of the presentations this evening. First of all, I hope it's been really clear that at the heart of it, we're all systems engineers. Yeah, we've been thinking about this as a systems problem at a system of system level. Secondly, I think throughout we've demonstrated that role that professional engineers have to take evidence and use that to make sensible, logical decisions with a measurable set of outcomes. Yeah, and we've shown that throughout the range of activities that we've done. But thirdly, I think as professional engineers, we have a responsibility to our organisations and to our people. And hopefully Kirsty has outlined how we, with the Naval Engineers strategy, are trying to take that forwards. We have but a short period of time in this great institution of the Royal Navy, but we have this responsibility for growing those people who come behind us and for stewarding that in a really effective way. And that has really been at the heart of everything we've done, which is why the power of people and those skills that we rely on is such an important component overall. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the opportunity to have taken the lead for the Defence PEI lecture this year on behalf of the Royal Navy. Admiral Hyam, as Chief Naval Engineer, sends his apologies. He left it to me as the Deputy Chief Naval Engineer to lead the session this evening. I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to take questions, and then invite those people who are going to join me on the stage for the panel to join me as well. Thank you.
Yes, I will do, yes. Well, that was very well organised, because I was trying to work out how with 6 seats we were going to seat 8 people, and I for one was going to volunteer to stand up. So, well done. That was fascinating, actually. And I find it difficult to sort of summarise in a few words, what's been covered, because, but you can see parallels between the situation you described in the Navy and what's happening in other areas of engineering. And you see, in some respects, 2 completely different sort of issues or directions that are hitting a lot of organisations. On the one hand, there's a huge amount of complexity, systems and data. And the world is awash with all this information that people are struggling to know what to do with. And whilst AI gets a lot of publicity, I don't think it's the immediate answer. And then on the other hand, you've got the much simpler things to do with people, and how we need people who've got greater professional expertise and resilience and the ability to deal with these complicated situations. And how do we empower people? How do we equip people to deal with these situations? And that's one of the questions that preoccupies professional engineering organisations like ours, because from our point of view, we're seeing a very strong shift away from the sort of once-in-a-lifetime accreditation of engineers as chartered engineers. You do that when you're 25 or 30, and then that's it type of thing, to a situation where how do we support engineers through 30 or 40 years or more, indeed, of their lifetime? So, having said those things, can I invite questions from the floor, please? And there are microphones, and if you could state who you are and what your affiliation is, please. So, over to the audience. There's a guy, someone scratching the. Sir.
Questions need to start from somewhere. Captain Ben Perkins Brown, and I know Admiral JJ, and I'm sure he'll appreciate a question. It's more of a cultural question, actually, and I've always been in the format that actually I should have a requirement and an effect. So going back to the capability route, but how culturally are you getting on with shifting the mindset of the whole Navy, which is buy me a new grey toy?
That's got to be Andy.
So that is a brilliant. It's a brilliant question, and I was talking earlier with James around some of the stuff we've been talking about. You will all get, but there are vast swathes of the Navy that don't get it. There's vast swathes of defence, and there's a tradition. There's a great example from the U.S. Marine Corps. The new Commandant General came in. Within a year, they got rid of all their tanks, which was a huge change. There are former Commandant Generals who are raising legislation to be, or having legislation to be raised, bringing lobbyists and stuff in to have the tanks brought back. One of those, former Commandant General, was taken in, given security clearance and shown why tanks were not the answer. Came out going, you're right, they're not the answer. Within a month, he was back championing legislation to bring the tanks back in. So we have got a huge challenge in terms of changing that around and that culture. One of the really good things is a guy called Rich Knighton, who's just been made Chief of the Air Staff. And the reason that is very important, and that's a 4-star, and for those of you who know that in the ranks, he's the first engineer to become a 4-star. So I think back to some of this technology and some of that things, engineers, so I come from a company called Babcock, there'll be many other, I was used to being an engineer, and therefore you sort of thought of that as being reasonably okay, and maybe a bit special, probably not able to be put in front of customers, but at least you've got a sort of what do you call it, a kudos. In the Navy, when I came in, I almost had to hide the fact that I was an engineer to start with. That's changing now. That's only in 2.5 years, but there is a change that's happening, but it's probably not happening quickly enough.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of to add to that, I talk about the fact that we have lots of complex platforms, and because we choose to put our people, our sensors, and our weapon systems all in the same piece of steel or the same aircraft. But actually, as we move forwards, these are still going to be complex, but our definition of complexity is going to evolve over time. Yeah, and so the way that Andy described, the sensor effect chain, the mechanism that we have to disaggregate the people from the sensors, and create a more systems-based approach, I think will begin to move that shift away from just buy me another one that looks like that, to, actually the effect is what I'm after, and there's a whole bunch of opportunities that are out there.
Good, thank you. And this is an issue which, affects companies and firms throughout industry, of the mind shift from the toy, the engineering toy, if you like, through to the sort of broader impact of what it's all about. And I think one of the areas that engineers are being forced to get better at is acting as a sort of translator between the complexity and the shiny toy and the rest of the world, and being able to describe things in terms that the broader community can understand. So thank you very much. Further questions?
Hi, just to put it into some context, how many staff are in the Royal Navy?
So the Royal Navy today is just over 30,000.
How many?
Just over 30,000.
And how many of those are
35,000 with civil servants.
Thank you. Sorry, 35,000, the whole force perspective. That includes Royal Marines as well within that number.
And how many are engineers?
About 10,000 of us.
So there are 10,000 of you. You seem to have a lot of projects going on in different areas and everything else. That's a lot for 10,000 people, isn't it? So most of what's going to happen is going to be through the subcontractors, through the BAE, Rolls-Royce, the Babcocks. And it's the relationship, in my previous role, is the relationship between the Royal Navy and those suppliers, which is key. You talk about spares, your need for spares at the right place, the right time. That collapses unless those suppliers have those spares and have that advanced warning on them. So the interface between the commercial sector and the Royal Navy is very important, but didn't quite touch upon it during the presentation.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right that the mechanisms by which we both generate and sustain the Royal Navy today and into the future is part of a national effort, and it's only done with our industrial colleagues alongside us. That we didn't focus on that today, is perhaps an oversight from your perspective, but actually what we wanted to be able to demonstrate was how we're engaging across the life cycle of the Navy and how we are using our ability to access some of the small and medium-sized enterprises with the emerging technology, mechanisms by which we draw down and exploit data, and the way that landscape continues to change going forwards is absolutely what we want to do. Steve, I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, of course. And what we're describing is the tip of the spear. There's a huge supply chain that we have to interface with. And we, certainly in the Royal Navy, as part of the Levine defence model, have had to go through quite a big change in the last few years, where now we actually own the money. And that's been quite a big change for all the services. So we've had to professionalise both our whole force. So that's why it was Andy's point, is that going from a military service to a service that also has a business agenda to deliver the programs and own the money is a really big transformation. It's probably bigger, I would suggest, than the transformation between our delivery agents in the defence equipment and support organisations and Defence Digital, who have had long relationships with some key defence suppliers, than actually that's been a bigger change about how we professionalise our service. So, as I said in my introduction, I'm an engineer by background, but actually the last 10 years have been about getting into program and project delivery. And that's one of the bigger changes. The interface with the supply chain is key, and we do it a lot in defence through primes, of course, and we're all familiar with the big primes. I think the big challenge we've got is providing a clear requirement across the supply chain. In our world, for years we didn't have one, and now we have the National Shipbuilding Strategy. That gives a clear demand signal, because what I hear from industry all the time is industry wants certainty. That they're up for the challenge, they're up for competition, but what they want to know is, am I going to be employing people for 10 years or 6 months? And that's the big certainty. And that's one of our biggest challenges, is how we provide that certainty to industry, but keep the incentive running. And it's a really big issue in defence about when you have to go sole source, maybe for operational advantage or for strategic needs, or when you need to keep the competitions going. And I think that goes to more of the heart of the question in terms of, yes, we're at the tip of the spear, but how you get that interface between your primes, your tier ones, your tier twos, the rest of the supply chain, so that we actually provide a consistency. And that's an even bigger challenge now. Certainly, I use the example of, in the Type 26 world, we've got Hunter, Frigate, and Canadian Surface Combatant. We're all looking at a global supply chain, and that global supply chain is all being impacted by inflation and skills, and that is all being driven by a global market which still exists there. So, you're absolutely right. I haven't answered any questions. I've just outlined the problems that we're facing.
No, thank you for that. That's helped. But I'd just like to say the enthusiasm of all your presentations and your presenters was commendable. Thank you.
Thank you. And the gentleman here who...
I was only scratching to wake Ben up. Good evening, and I fully agree. Some fantastic presentations. My name is Colin Sellers. I co-chair the Defence Engineering Committee with Ben. One of the things I wanted to ask really is from Kirsty's presentation about the people side, because there's a lot of the engineering side, a lot of the logistics side, all of that stuff, which is really interesting, but it needs people to deliver it. And my question really, not just for you, Kirsty, but for everybody, there's quite a lot of research about high-performing teams. And we're talking about high-performing teams here, delivering stuff. And one of the things about high-performing teams is that it's not about, the research suggests it's not about the skills and experience of the teams, but the psychological safety that there is within teams. And in particular, leaders in teams demonstrating their vulnerability, and also people in teams being able to admit things when they've gone wrong. How does that work within the command structure of the Navy?
So I come from an aviation background, so I can talk about that quite comfortably within that sort of context. We have something in the fleet ARM that we call Just Culture, which talks about being honest about the mistakes we make, so that we don't see big aviation accidents ultimately. It's really important for that to work by people being honest about what they're doing and where they see their limitations. I think certainly over the 18 years that I've been in the Navy, I've seen a real shift in how we work together as a team. I think, and I see it in the fleet ARM every day. There's so much more collaboration across all ranks and rates, which makes it a lot easier for people to talk. I talked about having an inclusive team being really important, and having a really positive and engaging workplace being essential. I think that only happens when people have faith and trust in their leaders, where they feel that they can be vulnerable when necessary, and that they can rely on the fact that their leadership's there to sort of has got their back, really, to make sure that where they're being asked to do more than they can that they can own up to that, and then we can support them in terms of trying to make that work. It doesn't happen all the time. It would be wonderful if every single person who turned up to work every day, felt that they were that everything was absolutely wonderful, and they could do that. And there's obviously pressure, particularly in the operational scenario, where it's really difficult for people to fail when we absolutely have to succeed. And so much of what we do, I think, within the people space is about allowing people to grow that resilience so they can feel comfortable under pressure, that we make sure that they've got the right skill set in place so that they can fall back on their training when they're tired and when they're feeling stressed. And I think if we can develop that resilient workforce, and a lot of that happens back in the UK, through training systems, through allowing them time to stretch themselves in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the engineering context. I think going and do some adventurous training, absolutely pushes you in a very different context, which you can then apply those experiences in the workplace when you are deployed and when you're being asked to do things under a huge amount of pressure. So there's lots of things that we try and do to try and make our workforce more resilient, and we try and help our leaders be better people and better leaders by understanding the vulnerabilities and the strengths of their team. We still need to do a lot more to try and make that the norm everywhere, but I've absolutely seen that sort of shift in sort of behaviour and culture in the Navy over the 18 years that I've been in service.
And I think if I can just come in to build on the excellent points that Kirsty's made, the great thing about the profession is that we have the 5 disciplines that are the marine engineers, the weapon engineers, of the surface and subsurface community, and the air engineers joining together. And when we came together with the working group to develop the strategy, it was because we had that mix, and therefore we're greater than the sum of the parts. We were able to take some of those great characteristics and play them out across the profession in its widest sense, and why we're so excited about now taking the strategy and operationalising it with the profession. This is the first step, in getting people to engage with it and develop and then progress and deliver it.
Okay. Good. Well, that was an interesting question and a very interesting answer, and one that it's a question that's being asked across a whole range of different sectors. I'm conscious of time, and I've overrun, or we have overrun by 5 minutes already. So, but I think could we just take one more question? I think someone at the back, the gentleman at the back there, was just a little bit quicker off the mark.
Sorry, I'm just a humble IMechE member with a science and engineering background. We've heard about the Royal Navy very well. You obviously believe this is working. But we've got 2 other services, armed services. We've got the RAF and we've got the Army. Do you see them following you? Are there lessons they can learn from you? Or have you looked at how they're doing things and learning lessons from them? Because after all, we can see the armed forces becoming more and more integrated. I mean, I think of the F-35 on the carriers. That, if my knowledge is right, that's pretty well an RAF, Royal Navy, more of a joint operation than it ever would have been 50 years ago, if that's correct. If not, please tell me I'm wrong.
Okay. Jeremy.
No, you're absolutely correct, actually. And Ben, who asked the first question, is the Defence Engineering Champion Team Leader, and is employed specifically for that task. So across the defence engineering community, we come together, the 3 services. In fact, when we were developing the Naval Engineer strategy, we drew heavily on other strategies that we were had previously been written and recently released in the other 2 services as well, because we recognise that we're operating in a very similar environment, particularly with the strategic challenges that exist in that environment overall. And we're certainly not seeking to compete with each other in that sense, but we're seeking to build going forwards in a collaborative environment. And that's exactly what Ben and Mark Robinson, who's here as well, are tasked with, which is to cohere across that defence engineering community, which represents some 50,000, I think, engineers across defence itself.
Okay, thanks. And we'll have one final last question. the lady in the white jumper.
Thanks for answering the last one quickly enough that I can sneak in. There was a lot of discussion about innovation across some of the talks, and I think we typically think of innovation in technology, maybe in data a bit, but I really liked the view on capability readiness level over TRL and how TRL often isn't your limiting factor. I guess, what are you looking at in terms of innovation in those other areas to bring up your CRL?
If you take across the whole piece, commercially we've done DNS have worked with us and IMechE to come up with it's called RAPSO, where we can put a commercial construct in place and people can come in and out of that construct. So we're actually using it for what's called the heavy lift challenge. We're looking at investigating and buying uncrewed air systems, drones. The innovation isn't actually with the drones, it's with the way we've commercially looked at that. We're working with the MAA, so the Military Aviation Authority, and the DMR, the Defence Maritime Regulators, because currently they don't have regulations to allow us to use drones. So we're almost having to work with them. So we're back to, I've got a drone, I've got the software, but I haven't got a regulation to say I'm all right to use it. So we're having, and that's one of the things the CRL level has struck, sort of seems to have struck home, is a lot of the people who've been shouting, go, look, you're not thinking about it, have now got a voice and can say, hold on, it's red, you can't go ahead. And one of the things I knew we were winning when people were arguing on the graphic equalizer whether it was really the lowest or whether it was an average of the, you knew they'd already made that mental leap. For me, the thing about the red, amber and green, the key is, if it's red, the SRO, where Steve talked about the senior responsible owner, the team can't solve that. So most teams there can get from amber to green along all of those elements. But if it's red, you've got a problem. The whole service needs to come in or something. You need that innovation piece. So across all of those, there are examples. I could carry on forever, sorry, on this, but there's examples across all of those where we're looking at stuff. The challenge is we're not going quickly enough. If you look at what Ukraine did, they nationalised their software engineers straight away. There's some things that if we were, and there's an argument we are under existential threat, if we were under existential threat or acknowledged it, we would do things differently across all of those levels to hit that innovation.
I wonder if, Scott, if you've got a thought on where you've seen either barriers to or examples of innovation in the resolution space.
I think within the resolution space, the key thing that I bring out is up on the Clyde, therefore, in order to improve that waterfront delivery pillar that I was talking about, there is actually set up a Clyde Innovation Cell. And whilst this might be at a much more tactical and operational level, what they do is go out and have a look, and they've engaged with industry to see what bits of kit that we can get in fairly quickly to enable them to do their job in a much faster manner, thus guaranteeing that waterfront delivery and shortening the time period under which it be delivered. They've come up with some really novel things. And actually, the big issue that we have again is going back to how do we get that into service beyond the initial purchase, understanding that there needs to be regulation and maintenance of that and calibration of that piece of kit. So from my perspective, it's been, yes, go and get it. At the moment, we're getting it for a one-off use, which is useful, and now we need to fight our way through the background behind it, which we're starting to achieve. So.
I know I'm on the panel.
You absolutely are. You absolutely are, Sarah.
I really wanted to answer this one as well because it sounded good. Thank you. One of the biggest barriers that we've come across in Renown, which is slightly different, is actually in our policy setting. We've got numerous policies across defence which were written quite some time ago, which are written by people who are not operating in the front line. And one of those, I'm going to get really, really tactical for a second. We've got something called single item ownership policy, which was a really, really good idea at one point in time because it meant that a computer could talk to another computer. But what it's taken us away is our ability to be really, really agile. And so when we want to be able to operate a bimodal supply chain, we want to be able to buy through two different routes. We've not been able to because the policy says we're not allowed to, which was absolutely barking mad. So we've actually been able to, it's taken us a while. I'd love to say it was agile. It was a bit of a marathon. We're now 12 months down the line, and we've actually changed that policy. And one of the most exciting moments in my career was not standing in New York on a Type 45 destroyer. It was actually seeing the policy that we needed to change actually come out in writing, and we've achieved that. And we're really starting to make headway in some of those policy areas, and I would say that's actually one of our biggest barriers at the moment to change. That's what I wanted to add.
Thanks. Can I just sum up? Not that I need to sum up after Scott and Sarah's and Andy's point there, but I guess for me, it needs two things. One, a willingness to try both at the organisational and the individual level, and we hopefully have demonstrated that we've got a willingness to try at the organisational level and a strategy that's encouraging people to try at the individual level and empowering them to do so. And then secondly, an acceptance of failure, which I think James touched on beautifully, at the start of the presentation this evening, that if you're not pushing and failing on some things, then you're not trying hard enough or you're not open enough to some of the opportunities around innovation. Peter, thank you.
Good. Well, that's quite a positive note to end on, and a nice little analogy there between the excitement of a policy document and a Type 45 frigate, which, or whatever, and which I wouldn't have predicted. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege, actually, to convene this meeting. We've had some really sort of solid inputs that have illustrated across a very complex and important national capability. We've had a really interesting discussion about what's going on and this interesting contrast between all this stuff about data and engineering and facts and people on the other hand, and how we get those two to meld together. In conclusion, I mentioned previously about our 175-year history. Although I haven't got it with me, one of the little documents I've carried around with me for quite some time is a small piece of paper which convened the very first meeting of this institution, which was written in October 1846. And it talked about meeting and corresponding, and by an exchange of ideas, learning from each other. And I think this evening has been a really interesting example of that in action. And I think those engineers of the 1840s had got their head screwed on. They knew what they were talking about because those principles stand today. So thank you very much for participating. Could you, well, first of all, logistically, you're invited now to the back downstairs, the Marble Hall, for drinks and snacks or nibbles, whatever. But could you please thank the panelists, both those at the front and those here, for their remarkable contribution today. And thank you all for attending. Great. Enjoy that.